One of the things about our show is it's going to be unique.
You are what you do. You can say any amount of things that you want to say, but what you do is what everybody sees.
People are like, oh, I'm just going to JV it. Like, it's just JV it. Like, what the hell does that mean?
I cannot tell you how excited I am to hang out with you guys today, so thank you so much.
Well, then that end buyer could come back and say, well, I didn't fully understand that it was subject to.
That's not a thing. Like, the SEC has thought of all of these things. They've been here since 1932.
And you can do what you want with your property.
Buyers have time, they have negotiating power, they have options.
Oh my gosh, I am blown away by your inexperience, and they've been in business 20 years.
And that includes things other people put on your property, right? It's your property that'll be okay. Suddenly, Cousin Jimmy's in a lawsuit.
A novation is replacing one contract or one obligation with another.
Out with the old, in with the new.
Yes.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today, we're talking about the ins and outs of investing in storage. I'm Andy Fowler, and I'm here with Sean St. Clair. If you're new to the show, make sure to give us a like. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube. You can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter. So make sure to go to those platforms, subscribe. We'd appreciate it. You can also download an audio version of the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Go there, leave us a review, download the podcast. We would appreciate it. With that, we're going to go to Sean, who has our legal update.
Thank you, Andy. So my legal update today is addressing a recent decision by a federal court in Alabama. So it's the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Alabama. And that decision deals with the Corporate Transparency Act and its constitutionality. If our listeners remember, early in January, we had Natalia Ulet-Grice on, and she spoke with us about the new Corporate Transparency Act that went into effect January 1, which requires basically small and medium sized businesses to report certain information to the federal government regarding their company. And it's pretty invasive information, right? So you have to provide your driver's license, certain identifying information, and then any professional, such as an attorney or CPA, who assists their client with the formation of the entity, has to also submit their information. They're considered a company applicant, and there's deadlines and timeframes for doing that. But it basically was and will continue to be a pretty significant regulatory burden upon small to medium-sized businesses. Of course, the larger companies are exempted out and they don't have to comply. So really the small to medium-sized businesses are bearing the brunt of this new regulation and reporting requirements. And basically anytime there's even a change to the address of the company, they have to go in and re-report all this information to the federal government. Well, of course, you know, this didn't sit well with certain small to medium-sized businesses and trade organizations. So the National Small Business United, doing business as the National Small Business Association, filed a lawsuit in a federal district court in Alabama for the Northern District of Alabama. And they brought it against the Secretary Yalen. So it's the National Small Business United v. Yalen, or Yalen, in the federal district court. And the National Small Business Association filed a motion for summary judgment, which is basically a motion saying, hey, look, this can be decided on a legal issue. There's no facts at issue. We know what the facts are, which is this piece of legislation, and we have the United States Constitution. And then we just have to compare the legislation with the rights given to the federal government under the United States Constitution to make a decision whether or not it's constitutional. And after briefing on that issue, the court in Alabama determined that the Corporate Transparency Act was in fact unconstitutional on a number of grounds. And I'm not going to do a deep dive into what those grounds are, but basically the court said that the federal government overstepped its constitutional authority, that it had no constitutional right or basis to regulate small businesses in this manner. And as a result, it's unconstitutional. So what does this mean? Well, it means there's going to be more court cases. There's going to be more litigation. There's going to be appeals. And so the next step basically is I'm sure the federal government's going to appeal to the Circuit Court of Appeals, which is basically the court right above the district court and right below the United States Supreme Court. And so they will appeal to that Court of Appeals. There will likely be a 3-judge panel that will hear arguments on the case, and then they will make a decision whether or not the district court's ruling was correct. And so they will decide whether they believe the Corporate Transparency Act is constitutional or whether or not the federal government has overstepped its constitutional authority. Whoever wins or loses at the circuit court level will likely appeal to the United States Supreme Court. So that's the highest court in the land. And the United States Supreme Court will then decide whether or not they even want to hear the case. But assuming they want to hear the case, which I'm guessing they probably do, because it's of fairly national importance, they will then hear arguments on that case. And then the court will make a decision whether or not the Corporate Transparency Act is constitutional. And that will be then the final decision and forever deciding this issue of constitutionality of the Corporate Transparency Act. So if you're a real estate investor that operates using LLCs, for example, what does that mean for you? Well, in my opinion, it means you continue to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act, because this isn't over and there's still a long ways to go within the court system. And so what happens a year from now when the United States Supreme Court makes a decision and maybe they rule that it is constitutional and you haven't complied? Well, then all of a sudden, you're having to run around and make sure that you do comply to avoid, penalties and the consequences of not complying with the act. And so in my opinion, it's better just to comply and hope that we will have a decision by the United States Supreme Court that finds that this act is unconstitutional and nobody has to comply. Our law firm, being a company applicant, we will continue to comply and submit the information for any entity that we assist with the formation. And so for us, it's business as usual. We will continue to comply until basically the United States Supreme Court tells us otherwise. So while this was a big win for real estate investors, for small to medium-sized businesses, it's not the end of the story. And my recommendation is to continue to comply with the CTA. And our firm's going to do that as well. When we assist our clients with forming LLCs, we will continue to comply. And then let's just hope as it works its way through the system that the district court's decision is upheld. And this piece of regulation and burden on small to medium-sized businesses is no longer in force and effect through the United States Supreme Court and a decision there.
All right. Thank you, Sean, for the legal update. With that, we're going to go into a few reminders, a few announcements for you, the listener. Reminder, every Tuesday afternoon, 3:00 p.m. Arizona time, we have the Creative Finance Collective. What is the Collective? It is a group of attorneys, professionals in the space of creative finance from all over the country. We discuss all things creative finance. We discuss how creative finance is being treated with respect to other states, how other lawyers are seeing it, how they're developing their own transactional documents in order to transact or to deal with the transaction of a creative finance deal. And we also make ourselves available throughout an hour for questions to you, the listener. So if you've got questions, make sure to be there. We're only going to sit online as long as we have something to talk about or as long as we've got questions to answer. So it's important, if you've got questions, be there. We're there, captive to you for an entire hour. Also today, we're talking about self-storage and investing in self-storage. So if you have questions about that topic, we'll take any questions in the final 15 minutes of the episode. So make sure to post those in the comments. We'll get to those and work through whatever questions that there might be. All right. With that, We're going to talk about our topic today, and that is the ins and outs of investing in self-storage. And with us to discuss that topic is Chris Hake. Chris, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
So, Chris, I understand you're a founder of the Madison REI, which had merged eventually and is now the Wisconsin REIA. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me today. The RIA is something, in Madison, I started about 13 years ago. And it was just, it was kind of selfish reasons. I actually just wanted to be around more investors. And, the only way to do that was to actually put something together. And so just started meeting with a few people out for lunch over a couple months back in, 2012, I think it was. And a couple months later, we ended up having our first meeting, had about 45 people, and we've been growing ever since. And about 2 years ago, Wisco RIA, who also has a bunch of locations in Wisconsin, we found a good opportunity for us to kind of pull the teams together and put everything into one camp. And we've got 7 locations now all over the state. And it's nice because people can come in, they can have membership in, Wisco RIA, which allows them to go really anywhere in Wisconsin for meetings and to network and do whatever they need to do, as opposed to just one city where, we know real estate, it goes all over. I don't want to be confined by borders.
Sure.
And so, I enjoy that part of it. And it's been nice to allow people to really expand.
So, Chris, tell us how you got into the real estate space originally.
Oh, boy. We only have how much time, right? No. I started just, like everyone, kind of get out of high school, go to college, and school wasn't really my thing. I was more of the guy who wanted to go out and just kind of do the work. And different from my father, who was a longtime banker, I kind of went a different route where I was more of an entrepreneur. And I came out of school and I just started working odd jobs, doing network marketing, trying to figure out what was going on. And real estate popped in back in probably the early 90s. It's been 30 years. Yeah, 1994 was my first deal. It was, a condo hack, which we hear house hacking all the time now. And I did that when it wasn't even a term, probably. I didn't even know any different. But got started. I was kind of handy. And so we did that. My wife and I moved in and started buying a few more. And next thing you know, duplexes and 4 units, and got bigger and bigger, and just kind of kept going. And through the ups and downs, as we know, the markets in 2000, tech bubble, in 08, the bust. And so I've just been on that journey for a while.
So you're the owner of Just Simple Storage LLC. Tell us a little bit about that company.
Yeah. So about 3.5 years ago, I started finding some opportunities that were in the storage world. And during COVID, a lot of things happened with opportunities I had set up, but unfortunately, COVID kind of put a stop to it because some of the banks just shut down. And I found my first deal, closed on it back in May of 2021. And I've had a lot of experience in real estate, but every asset class has differences, right? Nuances. And so I figured it can't be that hard. It's concrete and steel, and it's got one door, and it's the only moving part. So this shouldn't be hard, right? And you kind of learn along the way the things that are important for that asset class. And bought the first one in May of 2021, and then I had a gentleman, my partner now, Jason Myers, who was actually one of my coaching students over the prior year. I was helping him buy apartments. And right at the end of our working time together, after he bought 2 or 3 apartments, he said, "Hey, I found a self-storage facility." And we started talking about it. Long story short, we ended up partnering on it. And from there, we just kept going, kept buying and buying and buying. Have since sold our apartments. He sold his, I sold mine. And we've kind of moved all the chips into self-storage.
Okay, well, it's fair to say that you like self-storage. As we get into kind of describing and honing down what we're really talking about when we say self-storage, I want to just back up a little bit. You mentioned you kind of came across it in real depth during the COVID period.
Yeah.
Was that just happenstance, or was there something unique about that period that made self-storage uniquely
Well,
attractive?
it was right prior to that. So I was being intentional. So at our RIA meetings, we have monthly. I stand in front of the room every month, and we have haves and wants. So, do you have something you're looking for, or do you have, something to offer? And so I just was telling the group every month, I'm looking for self-storage. If anybody knows of any, let me know. 3 months later, at the back of the room, someone said, "Hey, I've got something. Are you interested?" And I was already prepared for it. And when I said, long story short, I got it under contract before COVID hit the US. And within a couple months, we know what happened March, April, May of 2020.
Sure.
Everything just kind of came to a halt. And so that deal died. But what happened is a year later, I got a call from the people who ended up buying it. And they called me back and said, "Hey, we're looking to move to multifamily. Are you interested to buy it?" So I ended up getting back into that same deal a year later. So COVID just pushed me a year down the road a little further on my first one. But other than that, it all went smoothly. And I just continue to network and ask people, just like I would any other real estate.
So let's dive down into self-storage specifically here. And you mentioned it before. There's a lot of categories of the industry when we talk about real estate, whether it's residential, commercial, which are just very broad categories of some much more smaller niche categories.
Mm-hmm.
What do we mean when you talk about self-storage? Define that for us. What are we talking about?
For me, and again, there's a lot. You've got climate control, right? Something that people want to have a space where it's heated and it's temperature controlled. I gravitated initially to, and it's the name of our company, Just Simple Storage. I wanted a simple business model. And so we have really focused our energies on simple, one-story, drive up, roll a door up, and take it out of your car and put it in your storage locker. And that's really what we've done. We haven't ventured into any of the climate control. It's not that we can't, but we've been really focused. And I think we've become very, very good at what we're doing because of that focus. And so self-storage to me is simple drive up storage that it's in the winter it's cold, and in the summer it's hot. It's outdoor storage in a steel box is really as simple as it gets. Yeah.
So when you say simple too, you don't really mean simple as compared to other types of real estate investment opportunities. You mean simple within the space itself of self-storage.
Well, I really do on both sides, because I've been a multifamily. I've owned duplexes and fours and bigger complexes for years and years and years. And the difference between renting a property that has someone living in it as opposed to someone just renting and putting their stuff in it,
I would imagine it's night and day.
It's night and day. There's not even a comparison. And what I learned a long time ago, owning a lot of multifamily back in the 90s and 2000s, was I did a lot of property management myself, because that's how I learned. And I tell you what, I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at. And I'm not a good property manager from the standpoint of rental multifamily type properties. I'm too nice. I can't toe the line, and people take advantage of that. And so I hired third-party management companies. But when I started with self-storage and I created my own management company, it was just completely different, because if somebody is not paying, I can simply lock them out of their storage unit, and they have two choices. They can pay, or we go down the road of auction. And it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, there's boundaries, of course, in there, but a lot different than the multifamily or renting to somebody living there. And that's what I mean when I say simple. To me, that is as simple as renting something can be, in my opinion.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Sean.
So, and this kind of an aside, but I'm just curious. You mentioned auctions, right? So you basically throw a padlock if somebody's not paying, and they either pay and they get the padlock removed, or you auction it off. When you auction it, is it like Storage Wars, where you actually auction the unit and they go in and find the buried treasure within the unit? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's funny, Sean. When we first started, we had been not, hoping for it, but we knew that was going to come. And that first couple we did was that way, where someone went out there and you roll the door up and you auction. It's just like TV. Really not real dramatic. I mean, it was pretty simple. Definitely not like the Vegas version, but it was basically that in a much more simple fashion. And what we've learned very quickly after that, there's a lot of great resources that now, almost for the last 2 years, everything is done online. I mean, we literally don't even go to the property anymore. It's all done online. People will go there, they'll bid on it. And again, my partner and that side of our group manages all that. So they would be better to talk about that. But from the simplistic standpoint, it's really a lot easier than the storage wars that we've watched on TV for the last decade.
So on your buying strategy, and maybe it's changed, but do you look to buy existing self-storage units, or do you ever go and construct your own storage units on land, et cetera?
Great question. So the very first one I bought down in Milton, Wisconsin was a 68 unit facility, 3 buildings, and it was roughly about 4 acres. And at the time, one of the things that really excited me about it, and I didn't really know much about storage yet, was there was about 2.5 acres that was just grass. And so the original owner had already drawn up plans to someday build more, and they never did for whatever reason. And so we were able to step into those plans and kind of that already mindset of, hey, we can build another 100, 120, 30 units. And so to answer your question, I'm always looking for properties that have value add. And value add to me is, can I increase the income? Can I decrease the expenses? And can I add more? And does it make sense? And so that property allowed for all of it. On the very first one, little did I know the day I bought it. And now I fast forward and look and reflect back. And that one, I built 108 units on there about a little bit over a year after owning it. The bank was being real cautious, as banks are. They wanted my first one. They're like, let's get it stabilized and all this good stuff. And we did all that. And it worked out really well. And since then, we have looked and purchased other properties. We've got 7 facilities right now and an 8th one that we're closing on next month. And several of those have the ability to build more. And so I'm always looking for extra dirt. But the ground up development is also something that is definitely of interest to me, because I know what I can build it for now, because I general contracted the last one we did, or the first one I did. And so it was a great learning experience on that for what can be done and what's possible.
So if somebody was going to build from the ground up, what are some things that they would kind of be looking for as far as zoning, permits, those types of things? What would an investor be thinking if they're like, oh, this land would be good for a self-storage facility?
Yeah, I think the big thing, I've been in real estate a long time, and in real estate, the one rule that you heard all the time was location, location, location. And in self-storage, that is demand, demand, demand. So I want to make sure that it's not overbuilt. And the market's been hot. Self-storage has been sexy for the last years, and it's becoming an asset class that's getting more notoriety. It doesn't mean it wasn't something people did 20 years ago, but saying that, from that raw dirt side, when I'm looking at that, the first and foremost for me is it in a place that needs it? Running a feasibility study, whether I pay for it or I've got some really good relationships that we built up the last 3 years with brokers who are very, very good in this space, and they work with us. We do a lot of back and forth, and so they'll offer up, I guess kind of a form of a feasibility study where we can see demographics. We can see the square foot per capita. What are those numbers? And all that means is how much storage space is there square foot per people living in a 3, 5, 10 mile radius. And so if we have those numbers, that will, allow all the dominoes to fall. as far as the progress of, checking with zoning and, all the things that will allow us to build what we need to build, depending on what the land is right now. So I think that's the biggest thing. People ask me all the time. I just got a text this morning. Someone said, "Hey, I found some dirt. How much should I pay for it?" I said, what I always say, it depends. And I started asking questions. And, I've looked at land that I'm paying 25 cents a square foot in rural areas in Wisconsin. And there's stuff I'm looking at down in the Illinois, Chicago suburban area that's going to be probably $5, $6 a square foot. And they both actually work.
Mhm.
So it's just a matter of the numbers. How's the math problem actually calculate out? And so that's really where I start on land is, what are the demographics? What's going on from a feasibility? Are there new developments coming on board? And if I can get past that and I hear I have good numbers, then I need to look at, okay, well, what's the zoning? What are the current rents in the area? Can I build and still make sense to rent at X, whatever that number is? So that's kind of my path. And if the green light keeps going, I keep taking the next step.
Chris, and looking at the feasibility studies on some of these, I would imagine this depends somewhat on location, but following your theme of keeping it simple,
Yep.
do you find some locations where the preference is kind of these big exotic facilities that are climate controlled, all these kind of things, versus that are obviously going to be more expensive because of all of that, but for whatever reason, maybe it's a higher demographic area or more higher net worth of folks that are willing to pay that?
Yeah.
Have you run into that or seen where there's a preference there, or do most folks look at this and think, boy, I like to keep it as cheap as possible, just somewhere to store my stuff?
It's a great question. And I haven't run feasibility, nor have I run numbers on development of climate control. And so I can't really speak to that. I haven't built that, but we have been gravitating more outside the city limits. So I've been trying to get more in rural areas, and we've had great success in those areas. And there's not as much climate control. And I'm cautious when I say that. I mean, there's always some, but if you look at where the climate control is, if you drive around and you actually look and at facilities that are in town or really close to more populous areas, you're going to find that's where the climate control is generally more, because you're going to pay more money to rent a climate control property. The whole mindset of simple, right? I know a bunch of guys. We're in a really large mastermind group with some really big players in self-storage in the US. And there's some of these guys and gals that, man, they just love the climate control. They are building 3-story and, these huge mega buildings. And that's great for them. And they run the numbers and they know what they're doing. They like playing in that arena. I've just found that the simple, I'm back to the word simple, for what we're doing. I think the majority of people would rather pay less and don't care about the climate control. There certainly are some people that need that for whatever reasons. But I think the majority of people, and affordability, the simple storage, drive up, roll the door, pop your stuff in, is what you're seeing more than anything else. The climate control is certainly a popular option, but it also comes with it, in my opinion, complexity. Now you have electric and plumbing and security systems and elevators and all the other stuff that it's almost like I'm back to having an apartment.
Yeah.
With the exception of someone living there.
Sure. So let's talk about the acquisition side of this. And this is always a question in all different categories of real estate investment. But in self-storage, have you found a particular strategy for raising money for the acquisition, whether it be traditional lending, raising private capital? What have you found to be the best that's worked for you in this asset class?
So of all the facilities we have, there are 4 different, I guess, paths that we've taken. Certainly conventional financing is part of a bunch of them. And private lenders. So in my prior real estate days, fixing, flipping, renting, rehabbing, doing all that stuff, I worked with a lot of private lenders. And that's what I learned from my mentors years ago. And that's what I've been teaching people for years. And so use a lot of private lenders in those scenarios. And I've brought many of those people into the storage world to, be, I guess, a private money partner with us. And it's just simple interest, something that they are comfortable with. So that's two. The third is equity partners. So we've brought some folks in that had maybe a little larger chunk of money, and their interest wasn't just getting, an interest check every quarter or year. They wanted a piece of the pie, as well as cash flow and the benefits you get with ownership. So we do have some equity partners as well. And then our last property we bought, I sold my last apartment building and we did a 1031 exchange. And so I was able to move those funds in, which are actually our funds from that property, which out of all our properties, that's the only money I have into any of them. So my first 6 facilities, I didn't put a nickel in. And we raised all the money, but we're buying value add. We're coming in. We had banks and or lenders that were comfortable with it. And we've got a couple deals too that are seller financing. So a land contract and some creative seller financing that has worked out well, which is really popular the last 6 months. You're seeing a lot more of that in conversations with sellers.
So Chris, let's talk about raising private capital. And I know for a lot of investors, they don't think through this issue enough, and they get sideways with it. But what type of disclosures need to be made, when you're raising private capital, or, what professionals should be involved in that process?
I'm glad you asked that. So everything I do, every dollar that I raise, we have an SEC attorney, Securities Exchange attorney that we use. I've been using him for, I don't know, 12 years, 14 years. And every single deal that I do where anyone's involved that it's not my money, it's either a private money lender or an equity partner. We have them, that our attorney draft up everything for that, because, if you're working with, as accredited, non-accredited investors, people that, just 2 different classifications, that is an area that I want to sleep at night, and I don't want to make a mistake because I think I know how to draft the right documents. And I get a lot of people saying, man, that's really expensive. And I said, no, that's a good investment. When I bring my attorney in, he's one of the most important guys on my team when I do syndications and when we raise money. And I use him every time. And I tell everyone and their brother who is lending or ask me about it, whether it's mine or someone else's, make sure you have an attorney that knows what's going on. Their cost or their expense or their investment in that is the number one investment you should have in your spreadsheet from the second you start analyzing that deal. It's cost of doing business, smart business. So I guess that's what I say with that. I think most of our stuff, and I'm not maybe up on all numbers, but I think they're 506 reg that we do. So we have non-accredited and accredited investors that we work with, if that answers your question, Sean.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I, find that a lot of investors out there are raising private capital, but they're not dotting their I's, crossing their T's, and using, the right disclosures and consulting with the right attorneys on it. So I'm glad that we talked about this. We've also talked about this actually before, which is you've acquired some of your storage units via wholesale. So you were the assignee, and you even have obtained bank financing on some of those wholesale deals. And I asked you, well, how does that work? Because, on the residential side, banks say no way, right? But on the commercial, it's a little bit different. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and, what your experience on that has been?
Yeah, that's a great question. In all the years that I've been doing residential stuff, and I've done plenty of wholesales and worked with a lot of people who have done the same. And once if there's a bank involved on the other side, on that buy side, every single one of them has been squashed because they just don't understand it. And until we moved into the commercial world, what I'm seeing and my impression of that is the commercial world just wants to know that the deal makes sense, that it's legit. There's not some padded numbers or some fluff in there that who's this guy getting 20 grand or whatever the number is. And so that's what I found on the commercial side, because not only have we purchased properties from wholesalers, which actually 3 of them, and one of them was a land contract, but 2 of them we brought in bank financing, and there were no problems because the numbers made sense. The debt coverage ratios were there, and what the bank needed to see to be comfortable, they were fine with. Same thing on the other side too. We've wholesaled now 3 storage facilities to other investors, and actually we've got a 4th one that'll be closing here in another month that we're flipping out to another storage owner, and we're in talks with him. One of those first questions I have every single time is your bank aware of this? Is your bank aware of this? Because that's always where things get squashed in residential. But so far in the commercial world, we haven't had that as a wall. Again, numbers have to make sense, certainly. And I think that's the difference in that landscape.
Chris, you mentioned before that one of the obvious benefits to this asset class is you don't have tenants in the traditional sense we're used to having tenants in properties. And it makes me think, honestly, of, as a young lawyer, I had to do a lot of the landlord tenant work for the firm that I was with because I passed that on to the young lawyer. And of course, lawyers only see the bad things that happen. So all I ever did was evictions. And I thought, who would ever want to invest in any asset class where they have to deal with this problem? And I, of course, thought the problem was, probably bigger than it was, but it's a huge problem. And it's an obvious value add as a real estate investor to not have to deal with that. So beyond just not having tenants in the traditional sense, having to worry about eviction and those kind of things, because you love this asset class, kind of walk us through what you think are some of the biggest benefits to investing in self-storage.
Well, the first one is the simplicity, and the management, which we just talked about, so I won't even cover that. Number 2 is that what I've seen over, and if you look back and you talk to people who've been doing it a long time, and just the research I've done the last 3 years, the great thing about this asset class is it's pretty resilient in up markets and in down markets on both, which I don't know another asset class you can say that. And I've been in a lot of them, because over the last 10 years, not counting maybe the last couple of years, the market's been like this, right? Everything's been going up. People could buy something bad and sell it 7 months later, and they think they're a hero champion because they made money on it, even though they bought it wrong, but the market bailed them out.
Sure.
And, as you go through and look at that, from the things that I love is when the market was going up, people were buying and buying and buying. Their house was an ATM machine. And so people are buying all the fun stuff, the toys, the boats, the 4-wheelers, all the things. Houses are getting smaller. Basements are getting less and less, built. A lot of slab on grade, definitely in the South, but in Wisconsin, we have the benefit. We have basements. And so
HOA is more restrictive.
I'm sorry.
HOA is more restrictive too, I would imagine.
Yep. And
you
can't park stuff out in front, and garages are getting smaller. So all the space is getting smaller. So with people that bought on the boom, they had extra stuff. Great for storage. Didn't matter. They're going to put it in there. On the other side, when the market took a tanker in 8, 9, and 10, people are like, great, now I have to move in with my brother and my best friend. And now we have 2 houses of stuff. Where do we put it? So that was a need. Plus you have businesses that were in the same boat. They needed extra place to put stuff or pay top dollar in their lease at their office, where that kind of space, they can't justify it, which makes sense. And then you've got the one that is there no matter what the market is. And that's people that death, divorce, all that kind of stuff that is happening all the time, no matter what the market is. And we have stuff in some of our lockers that literally people have put in there for 10 years and they've never even been there once. They just have it on a credit card and they pay $80 a month, $80 a month, $80 a month. So I think that is a really big part. I feel better no matter where the market's swinging, whether it's an election, whether interest rates are high. We're still full. I mean, we were full when it was crazy and everything was busy, and now the market shifted a little bit. Interest rates went up, and we're still, because of the system we built with our property management, we're still staying pretty darn full. So
Well, that's interesting because it sounds like from what you're saying is that most folks basically see their storage needs not as a luxury, but as a necessity, basically. So in other words, when the market tanks, it's not the first thing to go, like a golf membership or something.
yep. Well, and people miss that payment. Literally, I mean, we have stuff right now, and all of us do, on credit cards that it doesn't even come close to the car loan or the house loan or the other loan or whatever people have. Unfortunately, when there's $80 on there, people, they forget about it until it's time to not forget about it, when they have to sell, or they get a message saying, hey, your rent went up $10, which is a whole nother conversation. But that's kind of alert of, oh yeah, I have a storage unit. And so just a totally different mindset in the asset class for that kind of renter.
Let's talk about disadvantages to the asset class. I'll let you speak on this. Some of them that initially come to my mind. Now I don't know, when you explain self-storage, I imagine the row of units where you can pull up, slide open the door, and store it. Do you store vehicles, RVs, that kind of stuff, or is it just self-contained units?
Yeah, you can. I mean, ours have cars and boats. We don't have any RVs. We don't have any really huge ones. I mean, we do have bigger ones. I shouldn't say that. One of our site has some definitely big ones, but it's mostly that kind of stuff: trailers, people with boats or four-wheelers, and then just stuff, boxes of stuff.
So one of the drawbacks, and I don't know if it's a drawback, but just something to plan for that comes to mind in having used like an RV facility that I used at one point, is, the management always had to keep up on, because it's exposed to the elements, they had to keep up on, maybe rats or rodents or things like that that could either get into, containment or get into vehicles or whatever else. Is
Yep.
that an issue or a drawdown, or does that just come with the territory?
Yeah, it comes with the territory. And I mean, yeah, you're going to have spiders and you're going to have mice. And I guess if you have big enough openings, you can get squirrels and raccoons and stuff like that. I think the elements unfortunately play a part in that. Certainly you've got drastic heat and cold, right? And so you're going to have condensation. You're going to have stuff that is going to, I don't want to say necessarily mold, but it's going to get mildew, and that's going to happen. So, we are trying to educate the people that are renting from us, put stuff on a pallet, put stuff up, anything that's in a box and cardboard, don't have on the cement, try to put it on a shelf or do something, those types of things that you might feel if it got really, damp in there. It is concrete, and when concrete gets cold and it's hot inside of those buildings, it's metal, they heat up pretty good. And so I think it just comes with part of the territory. We do have tenant protection, which we're not an insurance agent or company, and so I don't say renter's insurance, but we have tenant protection where we work with a company to offer that, and we make it mandatory, to be honest with you. We didn't when we first started, and there's just too much liability that we felt after going in the business and getting our first couple, that it's just not worth it. I mean, things happen, and we want to make sure that people are covered. We've had a few people that they said, well, the place down the road doesn't charge, for insurance. And I said, then maybe you need to go down the road, because I think it's just, we're trying to do what's best for the people coming in, because we know what can happen, and we're trying to protect from the things that we don't know that might happen, right? Acts of God, weather, all the things that can come up. And so we just want to make sure not only our insurance is covered and we're protected, but that renters, that tenant protection they have in place.
So Chris, I mean, the way you've described self-storage, it's almost like, oh, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to start investing in self-storage, right?
Yeah.
But it's really not as simple as that. Talk to us about the, availability of opportunities, the market, the competition that's out there for somebody to actually break into this space.
Yeah, no, I mean, nothing's 100% easy. And, I just fell off the truck and I can go be a self-storage investor. Like anything that has a lease attached to it or renters, somebody has to manage that. And I mean, we can all do that ourselves. That's certainly available. But the properties that I've seen that are the most successful are the ones that have good systems in place. They have good models. They have good management, whether it's a person who owns it or the third party that they've hired. And I think that is absolutely critical. And what we have done is to really make that a primary focus on what we're doing. And it has allowed us to keep our places, to keep them, full or occupied again, at high percentage rates on that side. And so that is definitely a big one. I think the other thing is too, people think like in anything, I can just buy it and just let it kind of run itself. And, that whole passive income, we could have an hour podcast on passive income, what people sometimes believe that is. And, there's still our jobs. We are the owners. We have to manage the managers on that side. And so I think the management is a huge piece. Can anybody get into it? The opportunity is there. And I get asked all the time, whether it's single family homes or multifamily self-storage as well, people will say it either sounds too good or I see too many, or they're all full when I call them and, they go, it must be saturated. It must be, I missed the window and it's not an opportunity anymore. And what I tell people, you could say that about any asset. I don't care what it is. That is where you have to get educated and you have to get around people who are either doing it successfully or go figure out the people that are teaching that so that you can understand, what do I need to look for and what do I need to understand so that I can do it and be successful. And, it's not any different than any other asset class. If you think because the guy at your office who's at the water cooler saying, man, I'm cash flowing $500 a month and this investment's awesome, you don't even know the half of what he's even talking about because he may not know what he's talking about. And I think too many people go, wow, if he can do it, I can do it. And they do it without joining a RIA, without finding other people that they can hang around with, watch these podcasts and just get educated and informed. And so that to me is number one. That's why I started the RIA. I mean, talk about full circle. That's why the RIA was created, because I've always been a big, huge proponent on education in the real estate space. And so I think it's education, it's understanding, and the opportunities are there if you understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish.
So you mentioned, joining the RIA, being involved, getting to know other investors. So, say as opposed to multifamily, is identifying and finding the opportunities for self-storage different than, say, multifamily? I would think just, that multifamily would be easier to find as far as buying opportunities, versus, because there's probably more than, say, self-storage. But, if somebody's like, oh, I really want to take a shot at this, I want to find a good opportunity, what would be your advice on where they should start and how they should find, these opportunities to purchase self-storage?
Yeah. So, you bring a good point out about being apartments, right? Everywhere we go, there's apartments. And one could say, if I told you and you and I never had this conversation before, and I said, Sean, on your way home today and for the next week, just keep your eye open for self-storage, and you'd be amazed. You'd come back and go, I had no idea. I drive by them all the time. And what I would tell someone that's brand new is, finding deals is about creating an environment where opportunities come to you. I mean, we can do all the same things everybody does. In multifamily, probably the number one or two way is people will call realtors and say, let me know when you find something or it's on the MLS. Self-storage, you could do the same. There's not really, there's the bigger guys, which are the commercial brokers, where you would find self-storage. But the difference between multifamily and self-storage, which is another huge reason why I love self-storage, is the multifamily world is probably, and anyone could argue this for a couple percentage points, probably 75% of that arena is the PEs, the REITs, the big guys. And then the other 25% probably is still mom and pops, the guys who own a couple, whatever, up to maybe 100 units or something. Those are still the small. Self-storage is 180 degrees the other way. The PEs, the professional equity guys and the REITs, they probably control about 25 or 30%. So the mom and pops are still, I'm still a mom and pop, and I'm probably getting closer to maybe the middle, but I'm still probably looked at as a mom and pop. And that's still 70-ish% of the market, which is awesome because I find the best opportunities can be found working with directly a seller. I used to be a realtor for 20 years. And so I'm not saying don't use realtors, but I'm saying if we want to get to the source, I would be doing the types of things that get me in front of those. And that's going out and being aware of where they are, Sean, and driving for dollars. Unfortunately, in the self-storage world, there's not like these great lists where you can just go buy a list and you've got everything in the state of Wisconsin. If it's there, I haven't found it. And because I've been building my own for 2.5 years, and that's literally from driving from dollars literally on the ground and doing it on Google and talking to people at the RIA and whatnot. So the opportunity's there. I think it's just getting people to get focused and acclimated to what's that world really about, and then going out and actually doing the work part, right? That's making the phone calls, sending out marketing, doing the networking, that type of thing. So.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you taking the time with us to talk about self-storage. Really interesting information. Would love to talk with you more about it. Tell us and our listeners how we can connect with you, or what's the best way to connect with you online.
Yeah. So my email, real simple, Chris Hake, my full name at Gmail. So that's a real easy way. And then we've got our a website, jssmastery.com. And that's just kind of where we, show a lot of our properties and where we have information about how we work with people. I work with a lot of people. Just one of my biggest goals is trying to help people just get into their first storage facility. So a lot of the questions you guys were asking today, I'm having those conversations with people who are saying, how do I get into my first property? What does that really mean? And what does it look like? And so there's opportunity for everybody. It's always been the 80-20, maybe the 90-10 rule. There's only a small percentage that'll actually go out and do the work consistently over time. And so those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me.
All right, Chris. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Awesome information. Let's do this again soon.
Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and happy to talk self-storage anytime. Have a great week.
We'll see you. We'll see you again. With that, everybody, that is our episode for today. Make sure to join us next week. We're talking about transaction coordinators. We'll see you then.
Have a good day, everyone.